All right, so the last thing we need to do in terms of setting up controllers is we're going to need to create a clavicle controller so that we can do shoulder shrugs. The clavicles, really, that's where a lot of the performance goes when we're trying to sell like a heavy lift or a push or a pull, because we're being able to shift that motion in the upper chest and body. And so again, it would be nice if we had some type of clavicle control to get that movement. And so I'm going to hide the geometry for now. And what we're going to do is think about the type of controller we want to use. Now, with my character, I know I'm inevitably going to end up needing to use pins. I would recommend considering to use the rotation arrows. So I would recommend one of these 180 degree arrows, either the normal or fat. It really doesn't matter. So I'll show you how I would set these up if I were going to use one of these. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that 180 degrees fat. We'll go ahead and create that. And I'm going to rotate this on its side 90 degrees in Z, and it looks like it's going to be a negative 90 degrees to get it oriented the way I want. I'm going to grab this controller and I'm going to snap it up there to the clavicle. So I'm going to hold the V key and actually hit W to bring up my move tool, and then hold V and left click and drag that on up. And then I'm going to turn my geometry back on just so I can see how this is looking in relation to my geometry. So it's kind of in the way, and I'd want to position this so that it's a little easier to see and select. So I might put it sort of in the center of the shoulder and then push it off to the side. Possibly maybe even out here somewhere. And then we could scale this down. And I might even squash it a little bit in Z. Pull it out in X. And then what's really important here is once we're done shaping that up and positioning it where we need it, I absolutely want the pivot point to be on the clavicle. So I'm going to hold D and V, and it's left click and drag that pivot point right there. And then let's freeze its transformations. All right, so I would recommend using this for your clavicle if you're able to. Now with my character, I'm going to consider maybe not using it, only because there's such a dense amount of information here. There's not really a whole lot of clearance or room between the head and the shoulders. There's a lot of geometry really close together, and it's kind of cluttered there. There's a lot of controllers all together. So we've got the neck, the the shoulder, and that clavicle all in this near vicinity. And so that might eventually get kind of difficult to work around when I'm trying to select these different controllers. So for my character, it's not going to work, mostly just because of how he was modeled. But if you've got plenty of room up there, I would recommend considering the rotation controller. So at this point, I'm going to switch over to the pin. Everything that I do with the pin is going to be identical in terms of how I set this up. Again, the main important thing here is that you get it positioned. It's easy to see and select, and its pivot point is set to the clavicle joint itself. So let me go ahead and set the pin up that I'm going to use. So this is what I would recommend if you don't have room for a rotation arrow. So I'm going to go here to special, and it's actually not a pin, it's a nail. So I'm going to grab the nail there. It's the same one I used for the jaw. Let's rotate it forward in Y, 90 degrees. And then I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees in X. I'm going to turn the geometry off for now, and we're going to point snap this up to the clavicle. So I'm going to hold the V key, and we'll left click and drag that on up there. And that's probably going to be way too big, so let's turn our geometry back on and start to scale this down a little bit. And I really just want this to hang right outside the chest there. And I think that's going to be a little easier to see and select. And let's go ahead and take it and turn the geometry off. If you need to, you can move it forward a little bit. And then we just need to make sure the pivot point is right on top of the clavicle. So I'll hold D and V. I'll snap that there. Let's freeze its transformations. Let's name this. So I'm going to call this kid underscore LT for left underscore. Seeing this is going to be our clavicle. So let's clavicle underscore CTL. And let's see, so it's frozen. I need this to dictate the orientation of the clavicle, so we're going to set up an orient constraint. So let's grab the controller. Let's shift select the joint itself, and let's go up here to constrain, and let's go down to orient and click on the options box. And let's see, maintain offset is turned on, so that's good. And let's go ahead and hit add. And if we were to test this out, so I'll grab the clavicle there and rotate it, and my arm should follow. Now, the whole arm is following because I'm currently in FK. If I'm in IK, it'll behave a little differently. So the arm will stay planted, but the the shoulder and the clavicle should still rotate. So that's good. Again, just like with a lot of our other controllers, when I move the rig here, the controller doesn't follow. So we'll want to set up a constraint and a parent control group node to get this to follow with the rest of the body. So I'm going to select that kid left clavicle controller. I'm going to press Control G to group it to itself. I'm going to expand that group here in the outliner and steal this name real quick off the controller and paste this in, and we'll call this left clavicle underscore PRT for parent underscore CTL underscore GRP for group. And then I need this group node's pivot point to be on the next highest joint in the hierarchy that receives animation. So technically speaking, the sternum is the next highest joint in the hierarchy, but we don't animate it. So what we're going to do is we're going to snap this to the highest spine joint. Now in my case, it's spine joint 5. So with that group node selected, I'm going to hold D and V, and I'm going to left click and drag that on up there to the spine joint 5. I'll deselect that, and then I will select the spine joint 5 first, and then in the outliner, I'm going to hold the control key and select that parent control group node for the clavicle. And we'll go up to constrain, click on the parent constraint options box, make sure maintain offset is turned on, and hit add. And that should be it. So if I were to grab this and move it, that's going to follow, and then I should still be able to rotate. Yep. So like I said, I would use one of these two controls, but since I didn't use this one, I'm going to go ahead and delete it. But the process for setting that up is going to be the same as what I did with the pen here. And let me turn my geometry back on. I might want to copy this pen for the other shoulder, so let me turn my geometry off. I'm going to grab this pen and do a Control D to duplicate it. And you'll notice over here in the outliner, it put it inside the parent control group node. So I'm going to select that duplicate controller and do a Shift P to unparent it. And then let's go ahead and rename it. So I'll call this, let's delete out that one. And let's delete out the LT and replace it with RT. And then let's take this right clavicle and let's snap it over to the right clavicle joint. So I'm going to hold the V key and left click and drag that to snap right there. Let's go ahead and freeze its transformations. And then that controller should be ready to go for setup once you're ready to start doing the right side of your character. So let me go ahead and save this incrementally. And then the last thing you'll want to do, let me actually open up. So I've got another file in here that I finished outside of class. The last thing you'll want to do is go through and maybe clean up your controllers a little bit, just in terms of color coding things. So let me start by looking at, let's say, our FK controls. So I'm going to grab this arm and switch it over to FK. I'll do the same thing for the opposite arm. Let's go ahead and switch that on over to FK. And so in terms of how you color your controllers, it's entirely up to you. I just would remain consistent. I like to use sort of a standard convention that you see in a lot of character rigs, and that's that usually they will assign a specific color to left and right. And so a lot of times you'll have, or you'll see blue on one side and red on the other. Like I said, you don't have to do this. I would just be consistent in whatever it is that you do. So on my left side, I'm going to use all blue controllers. And then on the right side here for my FK, let's go ahead and grab those. I'm also going to grab my wrist, and I'm going to assign a red color to those. And so again, we got blue on this side, red on that side. I did the same thing with my feet controllers down here. So that's good. Something else you might want to do is you might resize these controllers if you don't like their size in relation to your character. And so what I could do is I'm going to shift select both shoulder controllers. Let's isolate them. And I'm going to right click and go to control vertex mode. Now you'll notice when I click it once, only one of them goes into the component mode where I can select its control vertices. But if I were to right click again and go back to control vertex, the next one will do the same thing. And now I can marquee drag and select both of those at the same time. Let's grab our scale tool. Now, if we leave the scale tool at its default settings, I should be able to scale it out in X if I need to get them further away. The great thing about doing this in component mode like this is we're able to reposition or change the controllers without affecting its pivot point and without adding any values to its translation or scale. So this is only if I want to move them away from the center of my character would I scale this out like this. Now let's say I want to size them differently. What I would want to do is come in here and do the scale center from object. So if I double click on the scale settings, we'll switch it to object mode. And you'll notice it'll actually scale from the center of each respective controller. Let me undo that. If I were to do it for default, it's actually going to scale here from the center, and it's going to rip off of your model like this, which I don't want. So let me undo that. And again, I'm going to go back to object here for scale center. It'll switch it to the center of each respective controller. And then I might actually scale these up a little bit. And then I'm going to do the same thing now for my elbows. So I'm going to go ahead and shift select both elbows. I'll isolate them, and I'm going to right click and go to control vertex mode twice. Let's marquee drag over these and unisolate them. And then again with my scale tool still an object there, I'm going to scale uniformly from the center of each controller, like so. So I'm actually going to bring these down in scale a little bit. You might need to increase the size depending on your rig. And then I'll do the same thing for my wrists. So I'm going to grab these and isolate them. Now the reason why I'm isolating them is because it's easier to do a marquee drag to select all the vertices. Otherwise it might accidentally select geometry or joints. And then let's scale these down. I want them to be a little smaller here. And let's go back to object mode. And again, you'll notice if I grab these and look at their values, the translates and rotates are still 0. And so that's good. Let's see. I'm going to switch this over to IK now. And then let's take a look at their locators back there. So I did color these, but I would maybe just be consistent here. So I'm going to have all my locator nodes the same color. The finger controls, you'll also want to color those. So I've already done that, but again, it doesn't really matter what they are as long as you're consistent. And I think that's good. The eyes, so I did set those up. So I've got sort of a green there for the main shape. Let's maybe do a different color here. And that's kind of, that'll work. It might be hard to see. I think I liked it better, that bright green. But yeah, I would just go through and color code everything. You'll notice again with the clavicles there, they're also colored and they correspond with the left and right side. So again, all the left side is blue, all the right side is red. So yeah, I would just go through and maybe consider coloring your controllers. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I would want to do to this rig. I think that's it. We'll eventually get a WorldCon in here, but we do that after we're done scanning. So I will stop here. there's really no time to work. The next class, we will start talking about deformers. So we're going to start talking about skinning or painting weights so that our joints will influence our geometry. And so we'll talk about deformers first. Skinning is a type of deformer. So we'll go through some of the basic deformers, which you've probably already looked at in the intro class. And then we will talk about the skinning process. So I'll stop here.